All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And for the broadcast schedule of the X Zone Broadcast Network and the many shows that we have for you 24/7, 365, with our compliments, visit www.xzbn.net. And of course, you can always watch the X Zone TV channel exclusive to Simul TV at simultv.com. Yep, we're still here in the COVID crisis. Pandemic's going crazy. The U.S. Postal Department's going crazy. It seems that there's something in the water south of the border, and, somebody said to me today, Rob, what about we build a wall and we get President Trump to pay for it? And I said, I don't think that's going to work. I really don't. As it is now, the access restrictions to the United States, as well as those from the United States coming into Canada, has been extended for another 2 months. And according to insiders in Washington, it's going to be another 6 to 8 months. So that's something to look forward to, right, gang? So I hope that you don't have any loved ones or good friends that you're used to seeing on a regular basis. Hey, we've got to do what we have to do. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. All righty. My guest this hour is SIDNEY D. KIRKPATRICK, and he is a Pulitzer Prize-nominated best-selling author of 7 books, which include A Cast of Killers, Hitler's Holy Relics, and Edgar, Cayce, An American Prophet. Now, we're going to be talking to our guest this hour about Edgar Cayce, and joining me now is SIDNEY KIRKPATRICK. And SIDNEY, welcome to the X Zone.
Thank you, Rob. What a pleasure to be on.
So tell me more about yourself, and how is it that you decided that you were going to write these books about Edgar Cayce?
Well, the truth of the matter is I got pulled into it kicking and screaming.
Oh.
Met a beautiful girl.
Okay.
And, I met a Canadian, actually, who became my wife. But we got along great. And she was beautiful, and she was intelligent, she was well-read. And we got along spectacularly on everything except this business about Edgar Cayce. She had been a diehard student of Edgar Cayce. She'd used Cayce health treatments, when her father was dying, and been a dedicated student since high school. I was sort of like on the opposite side of that, and I actually believed that anyone who put their faith in a psychic ought to visit a psychiatrist.
So basically,
as long as we stayed away from Cayce, we were all right.
All right. So basically, you were a skeptic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had this long tug of war going on about it, and she challenged me to visit Virginia Beach, where the Edgar Cayce archives are, and I went with the full intention of taking one of these, so-called psychic readings and showing her the error of her ways, that if you really studied this trance information, it would unravel. And so I went looking for that reading and to prove her wrong, and I couldn't find it. And it created something of a a serious challenge for me because I just couldn't believe it. And then I just, that was sort of the start of the rabbit hole, which I fell down to. And that was, it was over 2 decades ago. And in that time, just can't get enough of Edgar Cayce. You just study it. And my wife and I work together on our Cayce projects.
Now tell me, did the reading that you received at the in Virginia Beach, was it done by Edgar Cayce himself?
Well, the Cayce archive, Cayce was born in the late 1800s, died in 1945.
Okay.
Conducted some, probably 16 or 20,000 readings in the course of his career, of which we have maybe 14,000 documented. We have the actual language. One of the, Cayce is considered, arguably the greatest psychic of modern times, but you can't argue that he wasn't the best documented.
Well, let me ask you this. You told me and the audience that you were taken, that you were taken by storm, so to speak, when you had your reading at the ARE. So what was it that led you to be such a proponent of Edgar Cayce and his abilities if he didn't give you that reading?
Well, I went in to study the readings. The readings are all on file there. Today, they're all available on the internet. But at that time, you really had to go in to the library and look at these things. And eventually, I got into the vault. And the first thing that really hits you about these readings is the specificity. Names, dates, body parts, blood temperature, blood type. Cayce didn't speak in these sort of vague, ambiguous terms that we often associate with psychics, but just very specific. So, the next thing I guess that hits you is the volume. Cayce didn't give 50, 100, 500 readings. He gave in the course of his career, well over 14,000. And each of them are different. They're given for specific people at a specific time, a specific request, and what happens. And I challenge any skeptics to try this because it's what happened to me. You go into the vault and you see this and you start studying it, and you stop asking yourself, did Cayce do what he is said to have done? But how? How did he do it? And,
what do we know?
That's dropping down the rabbit hole.
What do we know about the young Edgar Cayce prior to him having these the ability to do these readings?
Yeah, a very good question because it's students often get confused because they imagine Cayce could just lay down and give these trance readings, and really that's absolutely not the case. He was a very strange, unusual child. This is, a decade after the Civil War, 1877, in a small village in rural Kentucky. And right from the earliest age, he had these imaginary playmates. So at least, the family called them imaginary, but because they couldn't see them, but he was always talking with them, conversing with them. And then his grandfather, whom he was extremely close to, died really tragically. He was thrown from a horse. The horse's hooves crushed his chest. Gosh. And Edgar was right there in front of him. So he saw the grandfather die, and this is 7, 8 years old. And soon after started conversing with his dead grandfather. Stories that a 7, 8-year-old child shouldn't know about the family, and it scared the daylights out of his aunts and uncles. And was this the devil speaking through him? Whatever. But Cayce started giving readings. The first reading might actually be traced to grade school when he was playing ball, and somebody hit him in the back seriously and knocked him out, knocked him unconscious, and it was just by accident discovered when he was unconscious, you could actually carry on a conversation with him or carry on a conversation with something, who or what. You know, it wasn't really Cayce. But so this developed, and eventually they learned that if you could hypnotize him, this same phenomenon occurred, that you could put questions to him. And the very first questions put to him were all medically related. Physicians were asking the questions about their patients. And that's where the specificity comes in. And Cayce gave this astonishing diagnoses for people who weren't in the room, in the same county, eventually in different countries. So he didn't have to lay eyes on them. You could just hypnotize him, put him out, and ask him these questions. And he was so accurate. So 90, 100% accurate on these medical readings that when people started asking him non-medical related questions,
Right.
started, with like lost pocket watches and things, but then came Atlantis, then came all kinds of metaphysical questions.
All right, stand by, Sydney. We've got to take our first break.
Yes,
Exonation.
Sorry.
Sydney Kirkpatrick is our guest this hour. KCUniverse.com is the website, and we'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue right here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. The topic of the hour is Edgar Cayce. Our guest this hour is Sidney Kirkpatrick, and his website is Cayce-universe.com. You mentioned briefly his what type of readings he would give, and you mentioned Atlantis. Didn't he get that one all wrong?
I don't think so.
But Atlantis
I think,
never.
he started that whole ball rolling in the 60s and 70s.
But the Atlantis never was found where he said it was, or it never, wasn't it supposed to arise from the floor of the Atlantic?
Yeah, and outside of Bimini.
Yeah.
And actually, I've been, with a boatload of researchers. We went following Cayce's footsteps. It's one of the, fun projects, among others we've done. We've also looked for pirate treasure, Cayce talked about. But, certainly Atlantis is a big question mark. Cayce gave a great deal of information on Atlantis. And had his medical readings not been so just uncannily, unbelievably accurate, then, the rest of it, Atlantis, might have been just dismissed out of hand. But it wasn't. In the medical readings just still stand up today. Cayce was saying so many astonishing things that were dismissed, like psoriasis, for example, which, today are considered, generally considered, a skin condition. And what Cayce said, no, is that that's not correct. That Cayce was saying poisons leaching out of your colon, on your intestinal tract, coming into the system and looking for a way to get out, and they create that, the skin condition. And Cayce's treatment for psoriasis is something like a 95% success rate. Epilepsy. Cayce was saying that epilepsy is not a brain condition per se, but that there are neurotransmitters in your abdomen. and that these have been damaged in some way or another through pregnancy, bulimia, getting punched, myriad of ways that they can get damaged, but that those are sending misfiring in your abdomen, and they misfire, it sends it up to your brain, which interprets it as a kind of like white noise,
Right.
and you get an epileptic fit.
So what does the modern day medical community say about all of the readings that Cayce did when it came to the medical diagnoses that he was giving out?
Well, many things which were, dismissed in the 1920s and 30s are now state of the art, and so the medical community has now embraced Cayce material, almost all of it, and in fact, he's considered widely considered, the father of holistic health because of the health treatments he speaks of and are recommended, even for us with worried about the pandemic. Cayce doesn't talk about the pandemic, but there are several easily followed things that Cayce recommends. And I'm not going to say they protect you, but they certainly boost your immune system in such a way that it certainly helps protection. As simple as a squeeze of lemon in warm water every morning when you get out of bed.
Where was Cayce getting the information that he gave to others from?
Well, back in the early 60s, 70s, it was generally believed that this was of sort of divine origin. And certainly in Cayce's time, Cayce himself believed that this was a gift from God. And because of that, he believed it shouldn't be traded on. And so he didn't charge, he didn't go on the equivalent of the Oprah Winfrey show or, beat his own drum, and that he kept it. He believed it's a gift from God and should be treated that way. Now that, 70, 80 years since he's passed on, we can examine the readings in ways that couldn't happen in Cayce's time. You can do computer searches, for example, through all 14,000 readings. You can look at treatments Cayce recommended that evolved over the years, and what we are discovering is that there were several sources coming through Cayce, and that certain of the medical readings has a similar kind of language and flow. Just like studies, have been done of, Shakespeare with the people who question whether Shakespeare wrote the, plays and sonnets or Francis Bacon did or whomever, and they've looked at computer studies of actual words and phrases. Well, the suspicion today is that there was not one voice but several voices, and in some instances several people, like inventors. When scientists and inventors were asking Cayce questions, oftentimes a science authority would come through and answer specific questions. And so that's something that my wife and I are very interested in studying and ferreting out, among other things. But I think it's a fascinating question, and will eventually shed much light on how the universe actually works, the sort of multidimensionality. The most strangest readings, one of the lectures that I love giving is sort of the 10 strangest, most unusual Cayce readings. And in 2 of those, you actually have an angelic presence of some kind who stops and introduces themselves. And in those 2 cases, it's Archangel Michael. And I know when I first read those, and still a skeptic, I said, "Oh, come on!" I mean, I said, "An angel, all right." So, I just dismissed it out of hand, and yet, as I've studied deeper and deeper into this, I discover so many aspects of it that really do seem like some some divine intervention. It's a story that I'll post on the site probably next week, because I've just been sitting on it as I've been researching it. But here's a girl, who was terribly abused. It was almost like a Silence of the Lambs kind of thing, and just horrific tragedy, and astonishing that she lived. And she came to Cayce after this tragedy, trying to ask for insights and advice. Well, why did I suffer this? I'm a good person. I've never harbored anything evil towards anybody in my life, and what comes through Cayce is just so interesting. And you have to wonder, is this some divine presence?
How much of this admiration with Cayce is the want to believe?
Again, Rob, you ask great questions, and I've asked similar questions over the time, and I know I sound very enthusiastic about this subject because I am. But that said, Nancy and I, Nancy's my wife, we look at the Cayce material as reference material.
Reference to what?
In which to glean insights. It's not like a religious kind of thing or another, but like when our kids get sick, we look, well, what does Cayce have to say? Because he almost any subject you can think of, there's resource material on. So that's really how we look at it.
Has he ever been wrong?
Yes, and it's in the 5 or 6 times where he can be demonstrably proven wrong that we have really interesting insights. For example, he was the most obvious case was he was asked to give a medical reading, and the person doing the requesting was the son, and so the son asked, about his mom. What can I do how can I do to help mom? So it was in New York. Cayce was in Virginia Beach, and Cayce gives medical advice, but at the exact time the advice is being given, she's dead.
Wow.
So, absolutely wrong.
Different time zone?
However,
was it a different time zone? Could that explain it?
No.
No.
Both East Coast.
All right,
However,
stand by. We've got to take our break. We take one every 15 minutes. All right, Exo Nation, we're talking about Edgar Cayce this hour. Are you a skeptic or are you a believer? Send me an email, exxon@exxonradiotv.com. And Sidney Kirkpatrick and I will be back on the other side of this break. And for more information about Sidney, visit his website, cayce-universe.com.
Just like I need you. Hold me, love me, hold me, love me. I ain't got nothing but love, babe. 8 days a week. Love you every day, girl. Always on my mind. One thing I can say, girl. Love you all the time. Hold me, love me, hold me. Where is the moment we need it the most? You kick up the leaves and the magic is lost. Tell me your blue skies fade to gray. Tell me your passion's gone away. And I don't need no carrying on. You stand in the line just to hit a new low. You're faking a smile with the coffee to go.
And welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And for the broadcast schedule for the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. And for the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV, simultv.com. Our guest is SIDNEY KIRKPATRICK, and his website is Cayce-universe.com. How did Edgar Cayce die?
Many people believe that it was a sort of brain drain. The who or what coming through Cayce said never to do more than 2 or 3 readings a day.
Uh-huh.
And during World War II, the requests were coming in mail sacks. I mean, just piles of telegrams requesting readings. Most of them, many of them, for people whose loved ones were overseas. And Cayce couldn't begin to accommodate the demand, and so he started giving 10, 20, sometimes 30 readings a day, and it just literally drained him. And he had a stroke and passed.
But why wouldn't he follow his own, his own precautionary diagnosis?
Well, Cayce's a human like the rest of us. He was told to stop eating, large amounts of pork. He didn't stop. He didn't necessarily follow his own advice. But you've got to think about it, though, that the source, which is what we call it, because there's no other real word, but who or what coming through Cayce was not Cayce. Certainly, reincarnation, which was a big part of the Cayce readings, or a portion of it, figures into the story. And Edgar himself had really interesting past life incarnations, which all figure into it. But it's a mosaic, and it's fun to try to put the pieces together. And a lot of important people try to do that. Nikola Tesla had readings. Thomas Edison had readings. Marilyn Monroe was using Cayce beauty products. Elvis Presley was one of the most interesting students of the Cayce readings. He didn't get a reading. He was like 9 years old when Cayce died, but he was surrounded by people who had readings and who studied Cayce. And so Elvis, was very interested in Cayce. And actually, on the night Elvis died, he was reading a book about Edgar Cayce. Many important, you're John Lennon. We were just hearing John Lennon was a big student of Edgar Cayce. So he's had a huge impact. One of the most remarkable things that Nancy and I, in our research, have done, I'd say like the first decade of research was really just on Edgar Cayce himself. And in the last decade or two, we've been studying the people who had the readings, because we've discovered that the more genuine the question put to Cayce, if this wasn't just like a fishing expedition, if someone really needed help, genuinely wanted help and said, Mr. Cayce, I've got breast cancer, or my wife's got breast cancer, what can I do? The more genuine the question, the more genuine the need, the more and higher quality, I guess you could say it, information came out. So we've been very interested in who received the readings.
So are you saying that Edgar Cayce cured cancer?
Well, I'm not going to say that. However,
but you just did.
Cayce cancer treatments are really interesting, and ought to be explored and should be explored, and by and large aren't.
Why not?
well, you've got to deal with the American Medical Association. You've got to deal with hospitals. You've got to deal with chemotherapy. But, Cayce has a lot of really interesting recommendations, like how ways to oxygenate the blood in such a way that cancer cells will not survive. It's very interesting. Cayce told one woman, actually told a husband, to raise a certain type of rabbit and build a rabbit hutch outside, start raising these rabbits because you're going to need a lot of these pelts. Mm-hmm. And that, I don't remember if it was once a day or twice a day, the farmer or the rabbit keeper was supposed to peel the skin off the rabbit, get the pelt, and to apply the fatty tissue against his wife's breasts.
So what did the farmer? So what did the farmer do with the rest of the rabbit?
Rabbit stew. I don't know. But there's so many cases of treatments which were just dismissed out of hand in Cayce's day that are now state of the art medicine.
But if that is the case, if that truly is the case, then why isn't his work on cancer taken seriously if everything else is?
Well, okay. Let's talk about epilepsy, for example.
No, I want to talk about cancer.
Well, I want to talk about epilepsy only because there is a recent study, and it shows why epilepsy was not studied in Cayce's day. Cayce said, because of those neurotransmitters, he said particularly sensitive people could put their hands on someone's abdomen and actually feel cold spots, and that these were the damaged neurotransmitters. And so in the let's say, I don't mean it a pejorative, but in the New Age community, there are sensitive people who do this and who can find this. So the epilepsy was treated that way. Well, now, after, the CIA and they've developed very sophisticated sensing devices now, which you can point at somebody. Mm-hmm. And a study was done in Florida just 2.5 years ago, official study, major medical journal, and right. they've studied 50 patients with epilepsy, 50 without, and the ones with epilepsy now show these cold spots. So it is coming around, but like in cancer, it's an uphill battle fighting an entrenched industrial medical thing. I won't say to suppress, but that's what happens. And Cayce's treatments, they're not something. They're public domain. It's out there. You don't need to spend fortunes. It's not something a corporation can copyright per se. I don't know. Am I making sense, Rob?
Yeah. Kind of, sort of, but you can copyright it because if somebody writes a book, they can copyright that book, right?
Yeah, well, it's yes, but the Cayce believed this. He believed that this was a gift from God, and it ought to be given to everybody, and he gave it to everybody. And you can go online and you can get these readings, and as I keep saying, it's a reference, and so. And for me, it's changed my life because I went from a skeptic to, you have to start wondering where all this stuff's coming from.
If your wife would not have been such a Cayce fan, would you have still gone into it full-heartedly?
No, I probably would have won a Pulitzer Prize. When I told my agent, when my mother was a writer and a big champion of my writing and was very careful about missteps in my career. It's like, oh, you can't do this, you should do that. But
Right.
There's always, just
Typical mother.
when I announced I was writing a book about Cayce, I just thought that the roof blew off the house. And in fact, it was the first book that I wrote that my mother had never read. She was that adamant against it, and so it was like an uphill battle. And even after I wrote it, I think the first 11 pages of the first Cayce biography I wrote are the best 11 pages.
All right, it's that time where I have to take my break. I've got to take my break. Please stand by. This is the final break.
Okay.
And X Zone Nation will be back on the other side as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with our guest this hour, SIDNEY KIRKPATRICK. We're talking about Edgar Cayce. Are you a skeptic or a believer? Send me an email. Let me know. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
You're faking a smile with the coffee to go. And tell me your life's been way offline. You fall into pieces every time. And I don't need
A new day, a new day. I was waiting for so long for a miracle to come.
X Zone Nation, our guest this hour is SIDNEY KIRKPATRICK. He is an author. He is also a Renaissance man when it comes to Edgar Cayce. His website is cayce-universe.com. What did Cayce do any readings about the future? Or was it... Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, but probably the prediction readings are the most misunderstood aspect of the Cayce work. You walk into a supermarket, the tabloids are always talking about, Cayce predicts California is going to drop off into the ocean. Maybe it should, I don't know, but, that there'll be earthquakes, cataclysms, and Cayce does, in maybe 1% or less of the readings, does make predictions. But what's left out, what's not said, is the conditional phrases before making such pronouncements. Given the current situation, this will occur. And the larger, most important message in the Cayce readings is that you make your own future, both individually and then as a community and then as a nation, by what you hold in your head and in your heart.
Right.
And so that if you want to change the world, you change it within yourself first. And the future is not set. That said, there comes a point of no return. And so, yes, Cayce did make a number of very scary pronouncements about what we might be able to expect. And gosh, I hope it's not true, because as we're talking, I'm in California, and California is one of those places that's going to disappear. But in Ontario, in Niagara, where you are, I think you're pretty safe.
Only as long as they keep the borders closed.
This is the first year I haven't been able to get back up to Canada, to visit the cottage, because I'm a U.S. citizen and my wife's Canadian.
Right.
So I certainly don't blame you if you want to build a wall.
We were considering it, but then we kind of figured President Trump wouldn't pay for it, so it was, forget it. What about extraterrestrials, UFOs? Did Cayce...
Good. Well, I'm so glad you're asking these questions, because I don't get asked these questions. So many Cayce, people are they fall into groups. The people who are interested in the medical aspects of it and in ancient history, Egyptians and stuff. But Cayce does give readings, not a lot, but there's two that really jump out, talking about visitations from by aliens, by another by something have visited Earth, and speaks specifically of where. Cayce also was asked just outright, is there life on other planets? And Cayce says, absolutely yes, but you will not recognize them. You will not recognize this life, by your current standards. In other words, they exist, but you may not realize, or you may not have the technology, you may not have the imagination to see them as they are. Interesting stuff. One of the most moving readings that I like came right at the very end of his life. And he was an older man, and he was looking back on a difficult childhood where he'd been called a freak, and he was sort of revisiting subjects that had been very sensitive to him as a child, but now, right at the end of his life, he was looking back into it. And he asked, I had these playmates, and everyone said they were imaginary. I made them up. Like, who were they? What are they? And the source came back and said, well, you've known these souls your whole life, and you've known them in past lives. And they appeared to you, these souls, as children, because that's the only way you could see them and understand that they were friendly and that they were there to keep you company, because you were going to have a terrible, difficult childhood and you needed friends. And so these were souls hovering around you as a child. And they eventually incarnated into flesh and blood and became your friends and supporters. So that's really interesting. And it was a medical reading too of a young woman who just suffered a horrible tragedy, and Cayce describes her soul hanging by a thread attached to her, and so it's not actually in her body, but outside the body, and he's giving all of these recommendations on how to heal that temple that's the body so that the soul can return, because if you don't do it right away, it's leaving. And then, anyway.
What were Cayce's religious affiliations?
Well, he eventually became a Presbyterian, but he latched onto the Bible very early in his life because it helped explain what the hell's happening to me, because he'd hear these voices, and it was like a rock. So he was certainly a Christian his whole life, and he read the Bible, once a year, every year for his life. He taught Bible study, and he had a lot of great things a lot of really interesting insights and things to say about the Bible, and stories in the Bible. For example, when one of the physicians, I think it was curious about a passage in the Bible. So after his medical reading, he asked, well, what did Jesus mean by this? And Cayce says, well, Jesus didn't actually say that. What he said was, and went on to say that what Jesus had said had been misconstrued and it had been revised, and at the Second Council of Nicaea, the whole story was changed around. So there's a lot of interesting insights. I keep saying it's a resource.
Yeah.
And you can delve in and you can look at what Cayce says about almost any chapter of the Bible.
Did Cayce have any children?
Yes. Actually, he had 3. One died as an infant, and his son, or his oldest son, Hugh Lynn, helped to found and carry on the Cayce studies by forming the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which was actually going in Cayce's lifetime. His son took it over, and actually his grandson, followed after that. Cayce's younger son, was very interesting, was an engineer and a scientist. And these are, my personal interest now is in the science and engineering, because
right.
when... popular.
Our time is going very
Oh,
fast.
okay.
We've got about 2 minutes. One of the questions,
Uh.
the final question for me is that if Cayce was a communicator for this source, when Cayce died, why wasn't this gift given to one of his children or somebody else to carry on the work that Cayce did?
One can argue. I mean, one of the greatest conundrums in the Cayce work is Cayce says, everybody can do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, that's very off-putting because, hell, Sidney Kirkpatrick, staying at the cottage in Huntsville, Canada, can't diagnose illness.
Has he tried?
Well, that's an interesting thing because Sidney Kirkpatrick also believed he could not see auras.
Mm-hmm.
And I followed the Cayce readings, and by gone it, I can see an aura. I mean, it's just astonished me. And I said, well, my gosh, if I can see an aura, well, maybe if I can train myself, maybe we all have these capacities, and it's just totally untapped. Or, as I've come to believe, you teach yourself you can't do it.
Right.
I think my granddaughter, I bet, can see auras, and we just sort of learn how not to do it. I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It really does. Listen, first of all, I want to thank you ever so much for coming on the show. It's been a great hour. Very interesting. And let our listeners know, once again, your website and what they can find there. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cayce-universe.com. And, we have put different postings on it, but the story we're going to post next week is just, I don't think you'll be able to put it down. I think it's the most exciting story of Cayce that we've ever researched, and I'm just delighted, Rob, that you'll have me on the show to talk about this because I really want people to read it, and it's free. We're not charging anything. It's just we're a volunteer group of researchers. Thanks, Rob.
I want to thank you so much for joining us. Take care of yourself and be safe, and hope to see you up here in Canada one day.
I'll take you out to lunch.
You got a deal. All right, Exo Nation. Once again, our guest this hour has been Sidney Kirkpatrick, and his website is Cayce-universe.com. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as the Exxon continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in Niagara, Ontario, Canada.